Maayan Hoffman, welcome to Australia. Thank you for coming to us here at AIJAC Insight. I really want to look over your career as a journalist. You started at Kansas City Jewish Chronicle, you're at the Baltimore Jewish Times. Over the years, you've been at JNS, Jerusalem Post, and are now executive editor at ILTV. 25 years is a long time, and the past 2 years in particular, reporting in Jewish affairs, Israeli issues, the war that we've seen since October 7. How has journalism changed for you since embarking on this journey 25 years ago, and what motivated you to take this path?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I started out in Kansas, as you mentioned, even before the Kansas City Jewish Chronicle, working at Sun Publications, which was a community newspaper in Kansas. And in those days, it was kind of hard to age myself and to believe this, but we didn't really have internet access the same way. So I remember going to meetings, calling up people afterwards, hey, can you confirm the spelling of your name? We'd go down, we'd put the paper to bed, we'd use X-Acto knives and blue pens. Yeah. And today, everything is digitized, everything is so fast. The information comes to you in your WhatsApps, in your Telegram. You're just, there's a constant flow of information, a constant competition, not even necessarily to be first, so that certainly is a competition, but just to be fast and to tell the story is constantly evolving. Journalism is, for me, changed a lot, from the written word to also now I still write, but do more on TV. I never thought I would do something on broadcast. I'm a more behind the scenes person. And it's hard for me to get up there in front of the screen. In a lot of my items, I don't even put my face. I record my voice, but try not to do a stand-up or to even show myself, except for on my own shows. I love interviewing people. I would say that my career is really, what's ironic is I started out in Israel the first time around as breaking news editor at the Jerusalem Post. I launched our breaking news desk, the internet desk. I was one of the first people there. First person to ever do an overnight shift in the Jerusalem Post.
What year was that?
That was in 2001, so a long time ago.
Yeah.
And really, that was during the Second Intifada. So I started out really in Israel. I arrived in Israel several months before it broke out, and then took this job and was covering, terror attacks back then. And I remember then talking about how I was like living through it and reporting on it at the same time. And you started to become numb, like to not necessarily, to feel it, because when people were dying in these attacks, and you had to go out and you had to cover them, and it was just part of your day-to-day. And when we left Israel on Shlichut in 2005, almost 6, I remember like my first work in the U.S. saying, wow, like I didn't realize how stressed I was, in Israel. And now here we are. And I moved back to Israel, it's been a little over 10 years ago, back to the country. And of course, the war broke out in October of 2023. And the irony was, at the time, I was actually deputy CEO at the Jerusalem Post in that window. But the woman who had been news editor at the time had gone on maternity leave in the summer. They were struggling, and they said, hey, can we just helicopter you back to the newsroom? Can you just manage this until she comes back from maternity leave? Sure, no problem. I was sort of doing both jobs. And that was, in the summer, and here comes October 7th, and the war breaks out. And it was Simchat Torah, and it was also a Saturday. And so I was sitting at home working, and I actually was more or less Shomer Shabbat at the time. But whenever I was running the desk, because there were young people on, I always kept my phone on and checked and just made sure. And I saw, rocket alerts coming onto my phone. And I thought, okay, well, whatever. Rocket alerts in the South, it's not groundbreaking in our country, unfortunately, at the time. But I'll just check in. And I realized very quickly something was different. And that began the war reporting, right, of 2 years of sitting there till 1:30 in the morning with my team, starting a live blog, understanding there were hostages. One reporter, Seth Frantzman, a good friend of mine, started to drive down to the South, reporting back in the car. And it just, from there, it just really didn't calm down for quite some time. I myself went down very soon after that, to see the kibbutzim, and then many, many, many trips to the South, to the North over the last couple of years.
Yeah. I want to go back to that moment, October 7, as a Jewish person, as an Israeli, as a journalist. You mentioned those reports were coming in, their updates, and realizing that there is something very different. Take us back there. What was going through your mind at that time, not just as a journalist, but actually as an Israeli?
Yeah, so honestly, it's a day that you just get chills. Yeah. I'm actually literally get chills.
Me too, actually.
Yeah, I need to talk about it, because I really, It was an incredibly difficult day for a number of reasons. Obviously, from the work perspective, that goes without saying. But as you mentioned, as an Israeli and as a mother, so it was holidays, so the kids are home. And the sirens started going off in Jerusalem as well. We knew that there was an infiltration, not too far into it, but we didn't know the extent. And at a certain point, there was a question mark as to whether or not terrorists had actually made their way further into Israel.
Yeah.
People didn't know, were they in Jerusalem, were they in Tel Aviv, were they driving on our highways? And, you were afraid to let the kids out. Now, remember, we just came off COVID, so kids had missed a lot of school. There were a lot of challenges in the country, anyway, all over the world, but also in Israel. And here, they're immediately, we're going to shut down the schools. We're going to have, we don't know what's going on. We understood there were people kidnapped. How did I find out there were people kidnapped? No official source. The embassy, the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. tweeted, "We know that there are hostages." And we thought, oh my gosh, there is a hostage situation. Nobody could have understood the extent. And then, of course, we're looking on the social networks, and Hamas itself is filming these people using their own channels. Much of it is public, and we start to see footage of what's going on. It took many, many hours. I mean, if you think about from 6/29, the first rockets in the south, to when the IDF was actually able to give us some concrete information, which was late afternoon, early to late afternoon, 1, 2 p.m., if I recall, where we started to get something, what we call rishmi or official, into the feed. Meanwhile, at the time, as I was deputy CEO, but I was filling in as news editor, but our editor-in-chief, who was Avi Meir at the time, was Shomer Shabbat. Everybody started to kind of find out from Shul, though at some point he came on. We had now Sika Klein, who was working, came on. I had one of the women who was working on the desk that day, didn't speak any Hebrew. It was a young team. It was a holiday. People didn't expect to have anything happen.
Yeah.
And I remember I was in my pajamas when this all started, and I sat down, I popped up my computer at our living room or dining room table. I did not get up even to go to the bathroom until 1:30 in the morning. So I sat there hours and hours and hours and just wrote and, reported, talked to the team. I mean, it was just an unbelievable day. And it was really scary because at 1:30 in the morning when I got up, then I had to sort of process, what does this mean for the kids?
That's what I was going to ask you. At 1:30 in the morning, then what happened for you, Maayan?
Well, I went directly to the bathroom, and then I mean to say that I was like, oh my God, I have not moved, and then I went to check on the kids, and was just like, wow, what is going to be for our family? What's this going to look like? It was only a few hours later, we just kept going, and the first few days were hard because I wouldn't let the kids out of the house. And because I'm a journalist, I often know more of what's going on, which makes it easier and better because I'm less scared most of the time because I know what's being handled.
You're in the know, yeah.
But in the other hand, especially in this particular case, we really did not know what was going on. Nobody knew. And we didn't understand where these terrorists were. And I remember saying to the kids, you weren't leaving, you can't go out until I tell you. By the way, that happened a few times during the war. Where I would say, I know that there's a potential whatever on, terrorists coming in to Jerusalem, stay off the buses, stay off,
Yeah.
And they would get so frustrated at me because they were like, well, nobody else is making their kids do that. I said, I know, but...
How old are your children?
My oldest is 22 and my youngest is 9. I have 5. And so it just, there were different points throughout this where you get nervous. And my son, even he's 22, but he's in a program called Pisagot, which is like this... It's kind of like an Elita Tuda program where they learn for a number of years. He's doing electrical engineering and physics, and then he gives 6 years back. But during the windows, they go and they serve on bases, more like Jobnik bases, 8,200, the intelligence units. So I'm not so worried about him like his friends that are in Gaza. But very soon after the war started, when the war started, again, it was a break from school because it was before school started. And so they were on a base in the Judea and Samaria in the West Bank. And then they transferred him to build the logistics center up north. And he was not allowed to communicate. So, even then, we didn't understand, rockets are coming in now. Remember, Hezbollah started October 8th, sending in the rockets.
Yeah.
I don't know where he's located. And it was really at least almost 5 days before I didn't hear from him. And I remember getting very, very nervous, and he wasn't even in combat.
And then on October 9, you went down south.
I went down south a few days later. Yeah. But no, I went down to see the kibbutzim. We actually, the GPO, the government press office had organized trips for journalists right away. In the beginning of the war, which is very interesting, when we think about how the messaging has gone, the government press office and the IDF were amazing, amazing. Information was flowing. They were organized. They set up for people to go and to see things under fire. I mean, it was incredible. I don't think it was the 9th. It was more like a few days later. It was like 3, 4, 5, within the first week, but I don't think it was the 9th per se. But within a few days, I had gone down to the south on actually, I drove myself, but to meet a group of reporters. We went down, we met at some place, we got on a bus, we got driven into Be'eri and Azad to see this. I remember, they told us, okay, when the rockets happen, here's what you do. When here's what you do. And everyone had hard hats and vests, and we went down and we got briefed by Zaka, and we saw, look, what I still remember the most from those early days is honestly the smell more than the visuals, I have to say. You smelled the fresh blood. It hadn't rained yet. It hadn't been cleaned. It took, the rainy season is generally October, but it hadn't rained yet. It was late rain. And you would go in the houses. It smelled so bad you couldn't go in. It was the stench of death, honestly, the stench of burning flesh, of burning buildings. I've never experienced anything like it before. Even again, that's why I was mentioned that I was there during the Second Intifada, because this was different. This was nothing you have ever seen before. And so I did that. And then, I don't know when the video came out. It was sometime also in the first 6 months, that 40-minute video. I don't remember the dating. I was already back at Deputy CEO, so it had to be after December, but I don't remember exactly when it was.
This is, just to be clear, the 40-minute video of the raw footage, all from Hamas GoPros.
Yeah, I was in the first
footage of the day.
Of that. And I went to Abu Kabir, which is where they brought the Forensics Institute, where they brought the worst of the bodies. Everybody was at Shura, which is like the IDF Forensics Institute, where they go and they identify bodies. But the ones that they couldn't identify, they sent to Abu Kabir. And I went there soon after also. And the package of it, honestly, is what really, I think, the stench, I remember the stench. And again, I've been down many, many times to this kibbutzim then, but then many, many times after. And I didn't really write about that, to be honest. I saw it, but I don't think I even wrote any stories about it. I went more for my own, And the video I also didn't write about when I watched it. And the reason I know that is because then when I went to Abu Kabir, which was not so long after, I finally wrote something. And I was more interviewing the families of hostages and and telling their stories, and not really writing anything myself about my own experience. And in fact, I did a video series with Svika where we interviewed within the first week, it's so crazy because now I know these people, but then I didn't even know who they were. The Weiser family, whose son they couldn't find him. And I remember interviewing them about that. And then, of course, a week later, they found out that he was murdered. Or Eyal Eshel, who I'm now extremely close with, whose daughter Ronnie was burnt to death in Nachal's base. She was a one of the Tatzpitaniot. She was an observer soldier.
Yes, yeah.
And now, I know her story so well. I've been to that base so many times, but at the time, I actually didn't even remember interviewing them. And then I saw a picture of them on the screen with me recently, and I said, oh my God, that was when they were still searching for Ronnie, and nobody even knew who she was.
Yeah.
And then at Abu Kabir, you go down, it's like a morgue. And I remember walking in the stairs, and I'm going to get briefed by the head of the institute. And one of the Zaka people was there to tell about what he saw. Anyway, I get in this room, there's gurneys, whatever, it's the morgue, And on one of the beds is this huge trash bag. And I said, what's in that trash bag? And the guy says to me, it's body parts. We don't know if it's one or two people. We have to figure it out. Everything is formaldehyde, right? Because they're keeping, and the stench of the formaldehyde and the memory of the kibbutz and the visuals of the video, it just all, that was it hit me in a way that nothing had until then. And anyway, I did the briefing, and we walked into another room, and there's these little cardboard boxes, and it looks like, I mean, honestly, like little pieces of wood, okay? And I was like, what is this? And they're like, oh, yeah, these are the bone fragments, and we're trying to scrape DNA. These are mostly from the Thailand workers, where they burnt the whole section down. They didn't know that at the time, you know, they knew where they were from. And I remember I went up to my car, and I sat in the car, and I just couldn't drive. That was the first time. And I'm like, now I can't breathe thinking about it now. It was the first moment that I realized oh my God, this is so heavy. I can't, you know, and it just, and all those smells and all those sights kind of went together. And then I wrote a column about what is hell? You know, what is this? What is this war? And understanding how much this was impacting our country and our people.
This dimension that you're sharing with us, there's been so much news, and it's been absolutely relentless. It's been the Israeli experience. It's been fighting a war on multiple fronts. And so I think it's incredibly powerful what you're able to share, because that is an aspect, a very human aspect that the world has not been privy to, because it's the first person. It's how you're actually receiving this, what is history, what will be history, but this major moment, and all the different complexities, but at the same time still doing your job as a journalist. And you're reporting on the fact. So there hasn't been really so much of the opportunity, because of the relentlessness of the news, there hasn't been the opportunity to talk about actually the realness and the rawness that was going on at the same time, with a country really in chaos for an extended period, trying to fight but trying to process at the same time. So how did you continue to, I mean, this is so early on, and this is cumulative. How did you continue to push forward with your job, with the hours that you're keeping, and the level of information coming in, and the trauma that's still being accrued?
Yeah, you know, it's, so I mean, first of all, I would say it's their job. It's just their job. I don't even know how to explain that, but I think, you know, reporters, it's a kind of, I mean, you know this, it's a unique role. And I don't really think about it like that. Do you know, to be totally honest? And there's something, I remember when the first, I don't remember what's going on with Hezbollah, why rushed up north, maybe it was after Majd al-Shams or after, I can't remember what it was. But I remember there was this big escalation period, and Seth and I just got in the car and we just drove up there. And my kids were like, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, well, that's what we do. You know, and I don't tell breaking news the same way anymore. I'm executive editor. I'm not always out in the field. I'm generally doing more analysis now and things like that. But I still always want to be in the field. And so I'm constantly I'm constantly going, and it's a feature story. Or I went to the hospitals and I turn it into an analysis about the hospital being ready for war, but I see it firsthand and experience it, because I feel that you can't analyze if you're not there for the news.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I'm constantly I'm not the breaking news reporter. I'm not running out and telling you, okay, here's what happens. You know, I'm more breaking it down afterwards, but I'm still to be there. And there is, I don't know, I used to say it's a little bit of a sickness, journalism, because you're addicted to the to wanting to have information and know what it is, though I don't necessarily need to know it in the moment the same way anymore in my new roles. And I would also say that I feel it's, you know, and this is actually interesting. I was mentioning that there's this study that came out, it was a Bar-Ilan University study that came out about the impact of the war on journalists, and they're finding that many, many more journalists than they would have expected are experiencing symptoms of PTSD. I like to say I'm immune to that. I'll have people know I'm completely fine. I don't know what your people are talking about, you know. But
vicarious trauma?
I know. I'm I know. Yeah. Well, that's what they say, right? It's actually very interesting, because journalists have both been on the front lines and seen things, as well as living vicariously, because they're interviewing so many people who are telling their stories of trauma over and over. And they did research comparing the impact on therapists versus journalists, and found that while 52% of journalists were experiencing some form of post-traumatic stress disorder or symptoms of, that actually that was 30% more. There was only around 20% of therapists that were experiencing the same thing. And part of that is because as therapists, have a network and of support. They're used to this, hearing traumatic stories, and they're trained to deal with it and to not take on vicarious trauma, even though, of course, some of them do. And in a situation like this, that's why still they're experiencing it. But they're, and because we were aware that therapists would likely experience this, things were put into place.
Yes.
But for journalists, that wasn't the case. And so many journalists are now struggling with levels of anxiety that are, unprecedented, with symptoms of depression, with really not bringing it home to their house and how they're acting out in their homes. It's impacted people's marriages. It's not good. I think, I used to say that because I was also in a leadership role and had these people underneath me who were experiencing it, that I felt like I didn't have the opportunity to not be strong. Certainly not when I was at the Jerusalem Post. And now it's different because 2 years into it, we had the around 12 days since I've been at ILTV, but there's been less. We were getting the hostages more back. We're telling the stories, but there isn't a new hostage situation. Soldiers, of course, are dying, 960 soldiers, and that's been traumatic. But in general, it's not been. People in the South are getting ready to go back. It's not more must have. It's a little bit different now than it was a year ago. One of the things that they said was that in that study was that the journalists who did best were ones who felt there was a mission. And what I will say is, even though I'm first and foremost a mother and then a journalist and an Israeli and also an American and all of these different hats that I wear, I feel like I am on a mission. Like when I tell a story, I tell it because I feel it's an important story. And the journalists that believed in what they were doing and felt that they were contributing to the war effort in some way by doing their job were the ones that had the most resilience. I do feel that way. I do feel that my job is to tell the news, I'm not an agenda journalist. I'm actually try to be very, very balanced. And yet I feel that I'm uniquely positioned as an Israeli that speaks English to be able to communicate to the world the truth about what's going on. And it's like so important because not enough truth gets told. And so I think that I felt very strongly that a lot of my work was that. And now, because I also have a medical background, I'm a medical reporter, and I cover so much of what I believe is the next pandemic, which in Israel, which is trauma, I'm writing a lot about that in order to help educate people about what we're going to need to do to be able to take care of our country. And now I feel that that's a very important story. And so I feel like I'm doing something important.
Yeah, I want to come back to that for what's ahead for Israel. But before we do, I know that you also went to Gaza twice. And you spoke a little bit already about the narrative, the other front as well that Israel's been fighting, and the information war. Tell me a little bit about your experience going to Gaza, going to the Keren Shalom crossing, and how you've seen different narratives from what you experienced.
Yeah, so look, I think what's amazing, went to the Keren Shalom crossing not so long ago when all the controversy was happening related to providing humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza.
Yeah.
And if you remember, there was this whole idea that Israel was opening the crossings, willing to let aid in. There was a tremendous amount of aid coming to Gaza, but the people of Gaza were not receiving it. And this was at the time when they were talking about a famine in Gaza, which of course since then has been disproven. But this was very controversial at the time. And so they were bringing groups to see the crossing, so going into the Gaza side in order to be able to look at the amount of aid that was sitting there, and it was literally rotting in the sun. Like there were just thousands and thousands of crates of aid.
Yeah.
Now I went in with a group of mostly, it was actually a funny group. It was like some influencers, me, and like a couple of other reporters. It was very funny groups that were getting in, at these times. And somehow I got into this one, and here I was, and I went in with a member of the foreign press. And he and I were in the same truck, and we went in, and, we're standing in the same crates of aid. And you can't get around the fact that there's crates of aid. That everybody reported. But the narrative was so interesting. Like I understood that there were no UN trucks there. Nobody was bringing it in. And we also remember the UN itself had said how Hamas at the time was, well, they didn't say Hamas, but they said that there were people hijacking the trucks.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was clear that the aid wasn't making it to the people, but it actually had nothing to do with the fact that the aid was being both it was being delivered, and in fact, what was fascinating for me is I saw a lot of Israeli aid, meaning it was even being purchased, a lot of it in Israel. Israel was allowing them to purchase aid to give to Gaza because it was like written in Hebrew on the boxes. There were also U.S. aid. There was, trying to think, like, there was just the children, UNICEF.
Yeah.
There were so many different organizations that had boxes there. And this other reporter stands there and he says, well, we have to question, why, again, these people are not getting aid. And I'm like, well, the boxes are here. They showed you what's going on. You've had a briefing. And I hear him telling a completely other side of a story that was just not rooted in reality. It was the reality they wanted to tell. And I think that sometimes this is one of the problems with the reporters that get helicoptered into Israel. They don't have the nuance to even understand necessarily. And it's not even agenda-driven. I don't want to say it's agenda-driven journalism. I actually think it's just naivety sometimes. And I think that there's a narrative that you're given, and you have to figure out how it fits the narrative. And then you find the pieces that fit your narrative. And by the way, this happens on both sides. But it's, to me, the challenge that I saw that day was just that this reporter came in, he stood in the same place that I did, but saw it so completely differently and told a completely different story. And I was thinking to myself, well, this is why we need people, first of all, to tell the full story. And by the way, I think it is important to note that people in Gaza are not living great lives. Like, I don't think it's fair to say that even as aid goes in, that these people are okay. But I think you have to understand what's causing it. It's not a question that people we're not, still, but at the time we're not dying, we're not starving, didn't have places to live. But what happens? Hamas attacked Israel. Israel didn't go in and attack Gaza. They started a war. They then used their people as human shields. They then stole aid and sold it at ungodly prices or didn't let it get to the people and put it underground. This is factual information, and it's proven at this point. So it doesn't take away from the starvation or the challenges of the people. But maybe what the world should be doing is looking at the perpetrator and then asking, why are we allowing them to get away with this, as opposed to blaming Israel? And I think that's where it gets so twisted, whether it's anti-Semitism, whether it's lack of Israel being on the offense instead of the defense and not telling the story enough, or giving enough information, whether it's not giving journalists access to Gaza and letting them see what's really going on. I think if you would put a journalist, from a Western journalist, inside Gaza, in the middle of the fighting, which would be completely dangerous, but in the middle of the fighting, they would see the human shields. And we don't want that to happen. Israel has been very careful in the beginning for security reasons to protect these journalists. Somebody mentioned at the briefing that I given for AIJAC the other day about Ukraine, and he was in Ukraine. And Israel really made an argument about not wanting journalists to be on the front lines unless they were protected for safety reasons. And you look at the numbers of journalists that were killed, and there's a reason. It
speaks for itself.
There's a reason for that.
Just to that point on dual narratives, more than dual narratives, we were both raised in old school journalism where you get to the fact, you put your opinions aside, you report balance, you report both sides. We've obviously seen there's been such a change in journalism. There's been such a change with the way in which people consume information and journalism, and people are more siloed now more than ever to polar opposites. They pick a side, and that's the media that they consume. So what do you think, observing from your perspective as a journalist in the field, observing other journalists and how they report, but also seeing how stories are communicated? What is key in this day and age where it's social media first, hashtags first, to cutting through with truth? How do you reach people?
Social media is extremely important today. Visuals are extremely important today. I'm an old school journalist. I like to write. And people want to see. So, and part of what I think is really working, and it's been very interesting actually interviewing other journalists who are doing this work as well, in different panels or other conferences I've been at, the boots on the ground mentality is extremely important today. People need to go, they need to record, and they need to be authentic. And, I gave a lecture just about a week ago about using your voice. And one of the things that I've had to really push myself to do beyond my general reporting, but more even in my own social media, which is mostly, I'm not a big, I'm very behind the scenes on social. I used to run social for the Jerusalem Post behind the scenes. I know how to do all the things on social. I do it for certain companies, but for myself, I'm not like so big about sharing my voice or arguing with people on X or things like that. But I do use LinkedIn a lot because I like to share my professional work there. And what I've really pushed myself to do is to actually talk about my work as opposed to just posting a link to it and saying like, here's why this story is important, or here is what I took of it, or here's what I learned from this person and why you should meet this person. And I think that that's and my authenticity is what I've been finding out from my colleagues or from people that write to me or what end up as offline conversations has been very important to not only building my own brand, but to building the brand of the places that I'm reporting for and to getting my journalism to be read and also people to relate to it and accept it as truth. And I never used to do that. Like I didn't think that was important, but I realized that the personal voice and the authenticity is actually extremely important today. It's a good and a bad thing. I do believe the pendulum will swing back and more. I don't love the blogging era. I think that it's very bad that people who know nothing can say their opinion and you're like, oh, well, they said it. So
but if you say it with confidence and authority, then it must be correct.
Must be true. If you say it loud enough, if you say it enough times, it's not, and it's really, I mean, look at Tucker Carlson. I mean, look at him as and talk about anti-Semitism is one of the biggest detriments, to the Jewish people. And he's got such a huge following, and he says things that are completely not even rooted in the Bible as if they're factual in the Bible. The Bible is something you can read, you can check that, and it's amazing to me how people just so blindly follow. And so I do believe, because I believe in democracy and in truth, that at some point the pendulum will swing back. The mediums will stay the same. I don't think video is going away, short form, quick sound bites, all of this fast, all of it's going to be here. Journalism has changed. Journalism, people like still long form in certain cases, but mostly no. Mostly now, you're getting that sound bite. So you need to make sure you're delivering in 90 seconds the most important information, the most accurate information. I don't think that's going away for a long time. What I do think is that where people are getting frustrated by the fact that they don't know what's true anymore and that you're living in these echo chambers and you're not hearing both sides. And ultimately, I do believe we will come back to real journalism. It will just be packaged differently.
Going with that further, when you look at this moment of time that Israel currently is in and the Jewish people generally, what is the story that you wish would be told?
Wow, that's such a good question. Is the story.
Or what are we missing, or what should be told more of?
Look, I think that it depends who you are, which story you need in some ways. But I guess for like Australia, for the world, I mean, first of all, I think it is extremely important that we understand for the Jewish community, for talking, first of all, that we are like one people at this point. The world has become so small. And what happens in Israel affects the Jews of Australia immediately. And honestly, what's happening to the Jews in Australia and around the world is affecting Israel. And we really need to understand that and work more effectively together. That message cannot be driven home more strongly. For the general community, the non-Jews, I guess, if you want to call it that.
The mainstream.
The mainstream. I think that people don't understand that Israel literally is fighting an existential war.
Yeah.
And it's not just nuclear weapons from Iran. All of these fronts and the anti-Semitism, that is anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, is putting Israel it's an existential place. Like we literally feel like we're fighting for our lives. And, day to day, Israel's not a war zone. And I also think that's important. Like we are people. Like I get up every morning, I go running, I have kids, life goes on. But on the front lines, and the front line is sometimes my living room in Jerusalem, depending on what the story is. We're really just trying to protect our people, and we know that if we don't, we might not be here.
Yeah.
This isn't
that simple.
Yeah, it's that simple. This is a real war, and we need to win it.
Yeah.
And we need terrorism to go away from Israel because we are the front lines of the Western world.
Right.
If we
That's the disconnect.
If we don't stop Hamas, which is the Muslim Brotherhood, which is extremist Islam. And it's not an Islamophobia. It's not an anti-Muslim. Because, there's extremists in all kinds. But today, the battle is this battle. And we have to stop it because you're going to lose your own countries. I'm American, and I see what's going on in certain parts of the United States. And I never, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, going to university would have had an experience like my nieces and nephews are today. And it is very, very scary. And Israel is fighting that battle on your behalf in some ways.
Just on the flip side of that, if we're to leave on a somewhat positive note.
Always the best way, yes.
What do you see in this moment that we're currently existing in? What hopes do you have for the future? We're coming into a different phase of this war now. What do you see as opportunities of optimism forward?
Well, I actually am a very half-full person, despite as negative as I just sounded. And I do believe that there's a lot of hope. First of all, I do think that in the end, I know we've done a tremendous amount of tactical work. And so in that aspect, I do believe the war is not over. But I think that we're hitting a new phase, as you said, and that hopefully we're going to see the soldier side, but we're also going to see these fronts begin to stabilize over the next year and 2 years. And please God, it will also cause regional stability. We'll see new people enter new countries enter the Abraham Accords. And I think that you will have a new Middle East if all goes well.
Yep.
Okay. On the other hand, as you mentioned, talked about the trauma, we are seeing a tremendous amount of trauma in the country. There are numbers saying that as we start to wind down, we're going to have as many as 3 million out of the 10 million people experiencing symptoms of PTSD. That's a terrible thing. On the other hand, Israel is a country that makes lemonade out of lemons. We've always done it. When you talk about water technology, we're the leaders in the world, and that's because we had no water. When you talk about cyber technology, we are also the leaders in the world, and that is because we are attacked by more cyber attacks than any other country in the world. And I believe that that's what's going to happen with trauma. So we're starting to see already a mapping of what they're calling right now mental health technology, what I believe I've coined what we called trauma tech, which is going to be new innovations, protocols, technologies in order to deal with this, because not just in Israel, but all around the world, there are not enough therapists, there are not enough clinicians, psychiatrists, there is not enough access to care. And we need to make it faster, more effective, more efficient, and we need to find new ways to be able to reduce symptoms. And it's literally starting to happen. I mean, just in the last year, the number of companies that have sprouted up in this field is unbelievable. Investment, and of course, we'll export it to the world. And so you talk about the Ukraine war and the trauma that's going on there. We'll be able to help the children of Ukraine. When you talk about America, for example, people are experiencing trauma for very different reasons, social media and otherwise, experiencing anxiety, depression, and more than we've ever seen, rates of suicide. Israel will be able to help. And so I think that in the long run, I don't want to call it a silver lining because there's so much terrible tragedy that has happened. But on the other hand, I am confident that when we talk in 5 years, we'll say, look what Israel has developed as a result of this. Defense technology as well, but in this space. And I think it'll be an incredible opportunity for the whole world.
Fantastic. I think we'll leave it there. Maayan Hoffman, thank you so much for all that you do and for your reporting and for spending your time with us today.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you.